Welcome to Femme Furious, a podcast where pop culture meets a feminine framing. I am your host, Julia Rose Portela, and we are here today to talk about the West Chesapeake Valley Thunderbolts. Asterisk. But before we do that, here's how you can stay connected, something that is super important after watching this movie. You can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch this podcast on YouTube or on Spotify if you'd like. You can follow the podcast over on Instagram at Femme Furious Pod. You can also send me an email over at femmeandfuriouspod@gmail.com. And if you really need support, love, community, join the Two Femme, Two Furious community. It is a wonderful space to connect with like-minded people who also like all of the same cultural content that you do. It is just $10 a month, and it includes Femme and Furious fully loaded bonus episodes, at least one bonus episode every month. You get 15% discount on merch and live events, Sunday Brunch, which is a virtual monthly hangout, Tea Time, which is the online chat, Fast Five, which is our weekly content roundup, and then you get the Suffragette Award, which gives you voting privileges on content, on bonus episodes, and more. All right, I've got my Avengers Assemble shirt on. We're chatting today about the Thunderbolts, and here is your spoiler warning. We are discussing potentially anything from the MCU in its entirety, but specifically we'll likely be mentioning spoilers or things that have happened in Falcon and the Winter Soldier or in Black Widow, because I would say those are two really strong anchor points to understand some of the threads that are being pulled in this movie. Here's the synopsis of the Thunderbolts. The Thunderbolts is a collection of rogue anti-heroes assembled by Valentina Allegra de Fontaine, and they operate under her Black Ops organization called OXE. When de Fontaine is under the threat of impeachment, she sets these anti-heroes to round up all of her loose ends for anything that may be illegal in her organization, and that would be each other. Going against their solo-is-better nature, these agents pair up to create what we know as the Thunderbolts, asterisk, and their agenda is to take down and expose de Fontaine. The movie's doing relatively well. It's got an 88% on the tomato meter on Rotten Tomatoes. It's got a 94% on the popcorn meter. So really pretty high received from both critics and audience. And it made $162 million in its opening weekend. So not too shabby. There is some conversation that I want to have around Marvel, but we're going to talk about that in just a little bit when we get to Valentina and her character and the Avengers as a whole and what this movie is doing to anchor in a new phase, new era, etc. The movie is sort of framed as a team-up movie or an ensemble movie, but it's really Florence's movie as Yelena Belova. And it was really well done, especially because there has been so much discourse in the fandom around the diversifying of Marvel, whether that is just bringing in more women characters or bringing in more characters of color. There has been so much pushback, and this is always really interesting to me because if we throw back to when Captain Marvel came out, not a ton of fan hype or excitement around it when it was sort of percolating in pop culture, but the movie opened with $455 million worldwide. So significantly more than even this movie is doing, and granted things are different. We're in a post-COVID world. No one goes to the movies anymore, really. There was 10 people in my local movie theater when I was seeing this. So I say that with a grain of salt because the world was in a different place, but the fact that a movie like Captain Marvel, which is solely focusing on a superhero who is a woman, having done so well at that moment in time, was a blueprint for what Marvel could complete and what they could do. And they've done this a little bit more with the TV shows on Disney Plus. But to really have Florence Pugh, who is a movie star at heart, be able to take on this role of Yelena Belova and to give her this centerpiece in the Thunderbolts as sort of like the leader was really, really powerful here. Now, the movie opens on some pretty heavy dialogue. We get Yelena who says, "There's something wrong with me, an emptiness." And then she goes on to talk about how she thought it was because of the loss of her sister, Natasha, Black Widow, Scarlett Johansson, if you're like kind of catching up here in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But then she goes on to say, it's deeper than that. It's a void. And then she's like, well, maybe I'm just bored. And as this sequence kind of goes on, she sort of ends this monologue by saying, I'm without a purpose. I'm just drifting like a river, or maybe like a leaf, or maybe like an old leaf in the river. And this is where it starts to, like, the monologue starts to break up, and you can tell this isn't just her internal dialogue. She's talking to somebody. She's working it out as she's in conversation. She's giving this entire monologue to a guy that she's holding ransom, holding hostage. And it's really funny for the movie to open on a line that is so heavy. There's something wrong with me, an emptiness, a void, only for it to end with a little bit of humor injected in there, and this sort of dichotomy of what is the life journey and what is the void. And this is something that is coming up for me just thematically recently, because I've just read the book Blood Over Brighthaven, and they discuss this idea of the void too, and like having this sort of empty or negative space, and that the potential for a river to flow through it, or what could be put in this void, like what are we doing with this empty space, is just really quite an interesting concept. And the idea of a void that, sure, it's empty, but what is the potential of what could be there, is something that was really on the back of my mind as I was watching this movie and as we sort of go through the dialogue today. Because she says it. She says the thing that is going to fill the void. Purpose. I am without a purpose. And this is the thing that she is seeking alongside of so many other different themes throughout this movie. And what creates isolation, and what creates a void, and what creates this emptiness inside of us. Because for some people, it is just grief. And for Yelena, who is grieving Natasha, some of the void is grief. Some of the emptiness is grief. But she even admits, like, it goes deeper than that. It's not just that. It's something more than that. I'm without a purpose. And this idea that there are so many things that could fill into this negative space within us. And what is the things that, if we have this empty space, we could either let ourselves be consumed by this darkness, this emptiness, this isolation, or we could fill that void with other things. And along the scope of the trajectory of this movie, we understand that it's community, that it is our found family, that it is purpose, that it is what we are doing for the world or for the people around us, and that it's still the same space. It's just how we are navigating what we are putting into it. And I thought that was really just a beautiful way to open it. And on my mind, because I am in The Last of Us right now. I'm in the thick of The Last of Us. One of the things that the showrunner of The Last of Us, Craig Mazin, always talks about is that the best drama actors are comedians. Because they understand something about human nature. And this is so fascinating that throughout the movie, we get a lot of this weight, this heaviness, this idea of a monologue just like this, an emptiness, a void, a sadness, an isolation, my shame, all of these themes that end up coming up today. But we get them sort of microdosed with humor, and humor as a defense mechanism, or humor as a coping mechanism. And I just found it to be really interesting. And so the beginning of this movie, really hooks you in with both the weight of the conversation that we're about to have, that this isn't just a superhero movie. It's not this family friendly, sit down with your family and watch. It's going to be discussing some really deep, profound issues that are relevant to most of us, especially those who have really suffered in the years post-COVID, during COVID and then in the aftermath, and especially in this American hellscape that we are currently living in. And this idea of touching on our mental health and what mental health awareness is, and isolation, and what is community in a time where we are just chronically on our phones, which is something that Yelena even mentions later. Like, we need to put our phones down and we need to be together. But not just even in the isolation of our phones, but what it has been to be isolated through COVID, to be living in a country that is divided, where you don't know whether your next door neighbor believes in the same thing that you believe in. And so it's keeping us sort of all on guard, where we might not be connecting in the same way that we would have in years prior. And this really has amplified in COVID and then these like post-COVID years. So we're in this different time frame, and we're receiving this movie at a period of time when I do not think anyone is unscathed from the idea of isolation, loneliness, or emptiness, being without purpose. Think about how many people during COVID had an awakening, where they literally called it the Great Resignation, which happened in this COVID world, where we are confronting our values as individuals, as a nation, obviously globally, because COVID was global, but the big quit, right? The big resignation, the great reshuffling. And it is this idea that will go down in history of people having an awakening, because we recognize that either A, we don't need to be working 40 hours, if not more, because we're able to do our jobs in less time, or just recognizing that I'm in a job that does not bring me a sense of fulfillment or a sense of purpose, as a reflection point to a world that is showing us what isolation can do. And so I think this movie, kind of coming post-COVID, is going to be well received. It's why I think it's doing so well as far as critic and audience, because there is so much that we can all understand about the themes in this movie and how we cope and how we deal with this emptiness or this void or this sense of isolation from other people around us. And I thought that this opening scene, with that little bit of humor underlining it, where she's like, hey, you're not even listening to me, to this guy that she's holding hostage, was a really brilliant opening, and I really enjoyed it. And then I had a hot girls hot take note, where Yelena Belova takes the guinea pig, and I had a note as I was watching the movie that was like, this is the most girly pop thing ever, because that would be me. She's here doing all of this violent stuff. She's literally hurting people. This guy shoots himself in the face, and she's having this horrific opening action sequence, but she takes the guinea pig. And is that not the most girly pop thing ever? I don't know. But that would be me. I would be taking the guinea pig. I love that she's just got it like kind of cradled in her arm as she leaves. And then it jumps to Alexi's house. And in a very different way, it's not this monologue that we have from Yelena, but we see that his house is a mess. He's in his underwear. He's drinking alone. He's watching old footage of himself, which is really giving like checking your own Instagram stories, which is something that we all secretly do. So Alexi's just one of the girls, okay? And the doorbell rings and he's like, I clicked leave on porch, and I just thought this was so funny. Again, this like very the stark reality of what it is that is actually going on, which is he's alone, his house is disgusting, he's unkempt, but this like humor of like, leave it on the porch, DoorDash. Like, we've all had this moment where DoorDash has like rung your doorbell and either your dog is barking or like you don't want to answer the door and you're like, just fucking leave it on the fucking porch. This is something that was really funny to me and it got some chuckles in my movie theater. I was laughing when it happened, only for him to discover that it's Yelena. She's coming to check in on him. He like washes his teeth with the dish soap. I cringed internally, but like this rushing to get the house clean, get it in order, get it organized for her because he wants to impress her because he loves her and he cares about her, and he doesn't want her to be worried about him, and he knows like internally this isn't good. This isn't something that is like healthy and normal. People don't do this. And she opened the door and they start to have this conversation. And for the most part, it's a lot of platitudes going back and forth, sort of how's the weather type of conversation. Very injected with a lot of that surface level humor. And they have really good banter together. David Harbour and Florence Pugh as Alexei and Yelena. They are brilliant together. They were brilliant together in Black Widow, and they are brilliant together here. They just have really, really good chemistry together. And I find David Harbour to be very charming, and I find Florence Pugh to be very charming, so they work really well in these roles, and yet they can both bring up an emotional depth that is quite profound. And so they have this really good banter going back and forth. And as all children do to their parents, she's seeking guidance from him, but because she's older, she's seeking it gently. She's not directly saying, I'm feeling this void. She's kind of just like, when was the best that you felt? And he goes, when I was serving, when I was helping people, when I was able to impact the lives of the civilians and knew that what I was doing mattered. And he even goes on to say that's something that Natasha got right. She understood the value of putting her skills and assets into hero work. And obviously, you know, anybody who's watched the trajectory of the 15-year saga that was the Infinity Saga, it's not like Black Widow doesn't struggle with this. She has this line in the Avengers movie where she's like, there's red in my ledger, I'd like to wipe it out. And that's her trajectory. She knows that she has things that she feels guilt and shame over, and her work as a hero, as an Avenger, becomes the way that she balances that scale. And so for her father, Alexei, to say, well, there's something that she understood about being a hero, that she knew that this was where that was going to make her feel best. That was what gave her the most sense of purpose. Okay, well, this is something that triggers something for Yelena's character, who is not only still grieving her sister, but is feeling this weight of the void, what ends up becoming this conversation about the void, this emptiness. And so what does she do? She leaves and she calls Valentina and she's like, I'm ready. And Valentina sort of pokes fun at her. And she's like, oh, you're ready for your close-up? Like, ready for your 15 minutes of fame? Whatever the line was, it was something snipey like that. But that's not actually what Yelena means. Yelena's not ready for, like, fame and fortune. That's not what it's about. It's not about a forward-facing persona. It's not about getting my face on the newspaper. It's not about glory. It's actually about purpose. And what she hears is not that your sister was an Avenger, go be an Avenger. What she hears is your sister had a purpose by doing good in this world. And so she's like, I'm ready to do one last mission for this Black Ops team. And then I want to go do good. And that's not the language, but that's the subtext, which is I'm going to follow in my sister's footsteps, who had red in her ledger, who wanted to wipe it out, and I have red in my ledger, and I want to wipe it out, and I want to do good, and I want to have purpose, and I want to feel something, and I want to feel good about that something. And Valentina is a complicated character, because I want to like her for being a woman in a position of power, and for offering opportunities to other women, which I want to talk about in a second, and also you dislike her because she wields a lot of this power in a very manipulative way. So as she's on the phone with Yelena, She's like, I love promoting women, which is predominantly true because she's got a woman working as her assistant. That's Mel. And then 3 out of the 4 people that she has on this special ops team are women. So we get Taskmaster, who almost instantly dies. So rest in peace, Taskmaster. We have Ghost. We have Yelena Belova. And then we have John Walker. And she does promote women, but she is going to attempt to kill all of them in the next scene. So as much as she's giving Yelena a little sliver of hope here, she's also ready to take her out just as quickly because to her, Yelena is a loose end. And not just Yelena, but Ghost and Taskmaster and John Walker and all of these people that she has employed over the years to do sort of her dirty work. So let's go to the courthouse and let's talk about Valentina a little bit more, because the introduction to Valentina in this context, we've met her before. She was in Wakanda Forever. She's married to Martin Freeman's character, Everett Ross, and she is a morally ambiguous, if not teetering on the air of morally gray character who we start to see some of her objective agenda here in the courtroom. Now, she's got this Cruella de Vil strip, which I think is really just very funny because de Vil, de Fontaine. And the pronunciation of her name is really interesting because her name is pronounced wrong. He says, Miss Fontaine, and she goes, no, excuse me, it's Miss de Fontaine. And I thought this was really great because later on, he intentionally mispronounces it again and he says Miss Fontaine, and he sort of has like a little snarky, sarcastic tone to the way that he says it later on in the movie. And this really reminded me of Kamala Harris and the way that the men in politics at present deliberately mispronounce her name. Like, it is not hard to learn somebody's name. It is the most kind and compassionate thing. The easiest form of respect that you can offer to somebody is to pronounce their name correctly. And the fact that they're all like Kamala, like intentionally trying to mispronounce her name to dehumanize her, to take away her power. That's what so much of this quick little power grab just reminds me of. And even though Valentina de Fontaine is not somebody that you end up wanting to necessarily root for, there are so many layers to the context of what is happening in this dialogue. She's not necessarily a good person. She has her own agenda. She's using government resources to promote that agenda, and we'll talk about why in a second, but still sympathize and empathize for her being a woman in a man's world and what that means in these small barbs that men in positions of power throw at women like Valentina de Fontaine just by simply mispronouncing her name. And now we learn her agenda, or we start to piece the agenda together, which is, if we're talking about voids, there is a void that was left by the Avengers. Tony Stark is dead. Steve Rogers is presumed dead. And even though there are these other key players that are left, they're sort of scattered to the wind right now. And what does that mean, and how is that fitting? Because this idea of the void and the void that the Avengers have left is one that is deeply discussed in the MCU, and one that I found really interesting in the way that they pulled it in very subtly, like a wink and a nod to be like, we get it, we know, we're trying. So some of it is just that the Infinity Saga ran its course. It ended with Endgame, and we were then moving into the multiverse and the expansion of this universe in a different capacity, in a different way. Then COVID happened, and they launched Disney Plus, and there was just an anomaly of things that sort of came together around the Disney Plus shows and how they were going to fit into the overarching web that was the MCU. And the fact that people are not going to see movies and how we're going to get this content out to people who are not seeing movies in the same capacity. If they can even go see a movie at all. Some movie theaters closed during that period of time. And then just what it is to move beyond a story that was the pinnacle of success for the Marvel Cinematic Universe and move beyond it and still try to be innovative or creative in some capacity, and what that means when you already have this pre-established thing. And Marvel, in its prime, was quite innovative in the way that it was telling superhero stories. It figured out this formula, this way to discuss superheroes. Like in particular, I'm thinking about Guardians of the Galaxy, which is such an alternative type of superhero story, and yet a fan favorite, does really, really well. Just to be able to move away from that and say, well, okay, now we're entering into a new saga or a new era. And in the way that they discuss it in Marvel, it's phases. And they started to build this out, and then they were starting to build out Kang, and then Kang as sort of a preface to the, like a sort of small arc into the larger arc that was going to be Doctor Doom. And then they had all these problems with Jonathan Major, and there was like just a lot of discourse and a lot of just like jagged edges of pieces that came through to sort of pop the Marvel bubble. And all of these movies that came out thereafter, and this sort of post-COVID, post-Endgame experience led to what sort of became like the fall of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And a lot of that stuff just really felt very disconnected, whereas like Marvel did this really great job of keeping a storyline connected through movies, through different properties and intellectual pieces. And right here, they're discussing, like, there's no Avengers. There's no Avengers walking through the door. That's what Valentina says. And we feel that as the audience. We're missing that. We, as Marvel fans, anybody who went through the journey of the Infinity Saga, anyone who loves these characters, loves this world, loves this story that they're trying to tell, anyone who's been a part of that, who's been touched by that, who's been influenced by that, which is like a lot of people in pop culture and like in our history and in the world, we feel that as an audience, like the Avengers are not coming through the door. And that's why so much of the past 5 years of the Marvel Cinematic Universe storytelling has fallen flat, and some things have really, really worked. And some of those things have been sort of contained stories, like Loki, which was supposed to be a larger story, and it seems like maybe it will come back, and it's certainly connected to other things that are happening, but can kind of be its own contained story, right? We have other contained stories like WandaVision, like Agatha All Along. And these worked really well, at least they did for me, on the Disney Plus platform. And then you have other pieces of content like Hawkeye or like Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which actually do play into this larger storytelling. And how do you start bringing in these shows that might not be standalone, that might actually be connected to the lore and the story that we're telling on a larger level, and make that digestible for people and make it accessible, because not everybody streams, not everybody has Disney Plus, not everybody is going to watch every single piece of content, and now we're adding so much more of it. So there is this void. There is this, like, the world has just moved on from the way that it was pre-COVID. Streaming is so much more significant than it was pre-COVID. And ultimately, the void that we all have, that this major story of the original Avengers has ended, has completed, and the story thereafter, the world thereafter, has not yet found its sea legs. And so when Valentina says the Avengers are not walking through the door, we start to get her motive. She wants to create a superhero, or is endeavoring to create some type of superhero that replicates what the Avengers were. Because at the end of the day, Valentina works for the CIA. She's had a intimate government relationship with these heroes who have worked intimately with the government over the course of the saga. So while it might not have been personal for her, there is this understanding that there has been a unit of people that they could rely upon to keep the world, and specifically America, protected. And this is why her character is like morally ambiguous, or like morally gray, is really interesting, because perhaps the context of the desire is well intended, but the execution ends up being harmful. All right, let's jump to the vault. First and foremost, where are the fanfics of Yelena and Bob? Where are the fanfics of Yelena and Bob? I know there are some of you that are going to be listening to this. My inbox is open. FemmeandFuriousPod@gmail.com. Please send me your fanfics, or the fanfics that you have found online of Yelena and Bob, because immediately their chemistry, as odd as it may be, was so delectable to me that I was like, I cannot wait to see, like 2 or 3 years from now, when fanfics have gotten published as full books, because they are so popular from this thing. Because Yelena and Bob, 12 out of 10, no notes, just really, really loved the two of them together. I love their chemistry. And I love this connection that they forge over this idea of the void, right? And quite funny, like the fact that his name is Bob, his name is Robert, but they call him Bob. And he, you know, as the story goes on, the amount of times that they keep saying Bob, 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 Bob is funny. It's supposed to be funny, and it's undercutting a lot of the really heavy tone of some of the conversations that we're having over the course of this movie. So right away, they're kindred spirits. They're discussing this idea of the void and like this emptiness inside. And he's like, well, what do you do about the void? What do you do with the void? And Yelena uses humor to deflect. She's like, you just shove it down. That's what you're supposed to do. And again, got a couple of chuckles in my movie theater, because isn't that all how we just feel? We feel that we all have somebody in our life that we know, especially for women. We either know that we need to stuff it down to get through a day. We have to stuff it down to get through a conversation. We have to stuff it down to get through our life. And this is something that is so, I think, so interesting for women, this idea of the concept and loneliness in the void. Because so often people tell us what our value and our purpose as women should be. And there's never a sense of getting it right. It's like, well, if you want to feel the most purposeful, you should have kids. And then you have a kid and you're like, this is really hard. And they're like, you should have another one. Or you should be parenting like this. Or, you know, you would have been much happier if you went to school for this. Or, you know, you'd need to be going out and achieving this or accomplishing this. Like, so many people will tell women where they think their purpose and their sense of fulfillment will be derived from. And so what is the void? It's this emptiness, it's this loneliness, it's this isolation that we hold inside of us. And for Yelena specifically, a part of that is feeling adrift, that she does not have a purpose, that she does not have something to give her that sense of fulfillment. And when she says, like, you just stuff it down, I felt that as a woman. And I know that so many other women will feel that too, because so often we are told what our purpose should be, and then there's no sense of internal compass or direction about what we actually want it to be, what is actually going to bring us the most fulfillment and joy. So I thought this was a really, again, nice way to have a deeper conversation and just inject a little bit of humor in it. And then I also really, really loved that Bob asks for a gun and Yelena's like, no. And then he ends up getting one throughout the action sequence. And he's like, how do I use it? And she's like, shoot it. And he doesn't know how. So she kind of grabs it and, they're shooting this gun together. And I just love this idea of like, it's not a man teaching a woman how to shoot. It's a woman who has been a skilled assassin for a majority of her lifetime is teaching this man how to shoot. And that these themes of like a woman's delicate eyes, right? Like shield your eyes, you delicate creature of nature, you beautiful flower petal, like cover yourself up, clutch your pearls, that these like delicate tendencies that tend to get placed on women actually get placed on Bob in this first scene, because we meet Bob through hearing him before we see him, and he's throwing up. And he's throwing up because of all of this violence that has happened, because Taskmaster is shot in the head. It's just this like thing that you tend to see correlated to women, or the tendency that women have in media to be the ones that are viscerally, through throwing up or crying or things like that, showing us that something is bad or evil or disgusting or whatnot. So I love that we get that introduction to Bob in this kind of conventionally through media feminine thing, and that the gender roles are swapped quite often throughout the context of the movies, or the stereotypical gender roles at least. So we get the explosion, they come out, Yelena and Bob's hands just briefly touching, and she gets sucked into her worst memory, or perhaps her most shameful memory, or one of her most shameful memories, where she is essentially luring and then betraying Anya, her friend, in order to get inducted into the Red Room. So Yelena's been conditioned through the Red Room to not really forge any of these deeper connections, because these widows are her competition, and to forge a connection with them, to ultimately have to betray them at some point or to lose them, is something that creates a barrier from her and from other people. And we come to understand through context that all of these characters feel alone. We learn that John Walker, U.S. agent, his wife and children leave. We start to get context about Bob and his family growing up, and that he felt alone and isolated. And so all of these characters who have this sense of loneliness or isolation, or feeling like they have been abandoned and left behind, only to come and create a found family together. But in this vault scene, it is this overcoming of the sense of betrayal, and that the other people aren't going to come through on their part of the promise or the deal, and what that means for them as they are forging this unit to stay alive, but then to also come against DeFontaine in the future. And this is so interesting with the discrepancies between villains and heroes in stories, because oftentimes the hero has somebody that they love and care about, and this is where the villain is able to exploit them and use their love that they have for whatever other characters against them. So I'm thinking like in Spider-Man, when Green Goblin has the train full of people on one side and Mary Jane on the other, and he's like, have fun, make a choice. And villains kind of get off on this, what is the idea of a hero, and what does a hero mean, and who do you save when you are saving anybody at all? And so ultimately, many, many heroes get put into this sort of very unique trolley problem position, where they have to choose between someone they love and care about, or choose between innocent civilians, and how that weighs on them and how it weighs on their psyche, and why they would like to keep their identity private so that the people that they love and care about are not even more exposed. So we get sort of an opposite trolley problem with these anti-heroes who have these dark pasts, who are attempting to forge a unit, but are so broken and have been so manipulated that can they actually come together to forge a unit, to forge a collective, to forge the Thunderbolts, asterisk, in order to go against this one person who is deliberately exploiting and manipulating all of them. And so the scene in the vault was really important to start getting some of that found family. Here we are, we're starting to come together as a unit, as a collective. And we get this really funny line from Yelena here when Bob and when John Walker start to go at it. And she's like, okay, we swung our tiny dicks around, right? You go over here, you go over there. It was fun. And again, quite a laugh, really funny. I love Yelena and these sharp little barbs that she has. And her humor is one of her coping mechanisms. And I love it because she does it so well. And it brings so much lightness into heavy weighted moments. And it does it in a way that does not detract from the heaviness or the conversation that they're trying to have. So I just wanted to say that again because the vault scene was really action oriented and also had a lot of deep, rich character moments. And then we get this levity of like, we swung our tiny dicks around, you know, not even just like our dicks around, but like tiny, like the fact that she's poking fun at both of them, even though, listen, she probably doesn't want Bob to have a tiny dick. I'm just saying, okay? Here we go. The found family is being found. And then we go to the sacrifice, the escape. They get out. Bob is willing to sacrifice himself for these people because in this very short period of time, they have forged a connection, especially him and Yelena. And we know that he's forged his connection with her because he obviously ends up going all the way up, sort of gets like altitude sickness, knocks out, falls all the way back to Earth. They collect him. They bring him back to New York. When he wakes up with Valentina, the first thing he says is, "Where's Yelena?" So we know that in this very short period of time, which is not short in the movie, by the way, the vault scene and like everything around the vault is like half of the movie. It's about an hour, if I had to guess. So not long that it's taken for Yelena and Bob to forge this connection and for Yelena and the rest of Thunderbolts asterisk to create this connection together. So we get the escape. I love that in the beginning, Alexi is like, you would not believe how many important people I meet when I'm driving my limo, and then ends up driving Valentina, overhears her plans, and comes to save the day for Yelena, for his daughter. And so not just found family, but this like family that had already been forged and that he cares about her and he loves her. And so late as he may be, he comes into the rescue and she's like so embarrassed. Like, Dad, you're so cringe, right? And we all have had this moment with our fathers where like your dad does something and you're just like, Dad, stop, right? So she's kind of, you know, feigning embarrassment with her father, but he's coming to her rescue as fathers are wont to do. We either get this arc of like the protective father or we get this arc of like the father who abandons or wounds in some way. And as is in real life, for the most part, if it was so simple and not so complicated. And here is her father, a hero at heart, the Red Guardian in his limo, coming up to save her and protect her. And I think this moment here of him coming to save her sort of bridges the gap that opens up the conversation later that they have on the streets of New York. And we'll get there in a minute. But before I do, I have to say that I took a note in my Hot Girl notes, okay? My Hot Girl hot takes. That says Pony, because Pony by Genuine starts playing. Molotov Cocktail. Sebastian fucking Stan. This whole scene, I was like giddy in my seat. I was dancing. I was so happy. David Harbour as Alexi is so charming and just funny. He's like, give me the bottle service. And she's like, I don't know, now's like a good time to be drinking. And he takes the vodka, he takes a swig of it, and he's like, creates this Molotov cocktail. And it was just amazing. It was funny. It was light. It was action oriented, but it wasn't so deep in the action that you can't get the character beats as well. And this sort of funny induced moment of like Pony plays. He's like, let's get the defense systems going. And he puts on Pony. I was really laughing. I thought it was really quite funny. And then I had another Hot Girls hot take, which is a note underneath the Pony Molotov cocktail Sebastian fucking Stan is a note that says, I want to have sex with everyone in this cast because I really do. They are all hot. Every single person in this cast is hot. I don't care what you say. If you said there is a Thunderbolts asterisk orgy happening, and you get to join, this is so inappropriate. But like, I would 100% do it. They are all steamy, smoking hot. Florence Pugh, the whole movie with like the blue eyeliner underneath. 12 out of 10, no notes. I was horny the entire time. And then we move into this idea of creating the century. And we get Valentina, and she's wearing this outfit, and she's like, does this look nurturing enough? And then she goes in, and she starts having this conversation with him. She's completely infantilizing him, using everything about his background against him. And he feels violated by it. He even says, like, you're not supposed to know this about my father, which is so interesting because his part of his power, right, with the void is, we know from when he touched hands with Valentina, we know from when he touched hands with John Walker, that he's able to see into their memories, that he's able to witness this thing about them. So he also violates people's most private, shameful moments. And yet, in this moment when it's being used against him, you can see his body language closes up, his like legs come in further, his arms start to close up around his body, and he's like, you are not supposed to know that, and he starts shutting down to her. And she has taken these characters and has forged them or manipulated them to come work with her under periods of duress, or a period where they have been broken, or a period where something grave has been lost for them. So John Walker kills somebody with the Captain America shield. Horrific, by the way. And she takes him in the aftermath of that and says, how about being U.S. agent? She finds Yelena at Natasha's grave at the end of Black Widow when Yelena is grieving and coming to terms with what has happened to Natasha. And Valentina comes in and she manipulates her and she pulls her in. And she's done this to all of these characters, and then we get to see it here firsthand. We see it firsthand other places. Obviously, I've just talked about them, but we get to really see it firsthand at just how manipulative she is. The fact that she says, like, does this look nurturing enough? And then she goes in there and she says to Bob, I'm the only one who knows your true potential, and it's limitless. And it's supposed to be this like really maternal, like kiss on the head moment where your mom is like, oh honey, you can do anything, like reach for the stars. It was giving that type of vibe, but in a way where it's deliberately being used to manipulate this person. And it was totally reminding me of the movie Everything, Everything. If you've not seen that, it came out in 2017, and it's like this love story of this young boy who moves in next door to this girl, and bedroom windows face each other. And as they get to know each other, he discovers that she's terminally ill, that she's got this insane sickness, and she never leaves her house and all of this stuff. And over the course of the movie, it's discovered that the mom is lying, that she does not have this illness, and the repercussions of that. And this is a story that you've maybe heard once or twice in public-facing pop culture, where a mother will lie about their daughter having a terminal illness for their own manipulative game. And that's exactly what Valentina is doing to Bob here. She's completely manipulating him through this maternal infantilizing act that she's putting on in order to turn him into the Sentry, because what she wants is credit for the Avengers that will be walking through the door. And this is classic abuse from Valentina, because all abusers just try to isolate their victim from the people that they love and they care about. So as soon as Bob is like, where's Yelena? Valentina's like, well, you don't want to be part of that. You don't want to be with them. They're not good people. They do bad things. And starts to try and isolate him and like create this wedge between him and the people that are his found family, that are his friends, that actually do care about him. So really good stuff in the scene. I really enjoyed that. And then we get the scene between Yelena and Alexei where she's like, Daddy, I'm so alone, and my heart broke into a million fucking pieces because we have all been there. You have been there where you have looked to your parents, whether that is your father or your mother, and you have just been like, I'm alone, I'm not doing well, or at least I have. I won't say this for everybody, but just what it is to be so alone that this relationship that you're not even sure about, which Yelena's not sure about, because she's like, I haven't heard from you in a year. And we get sort of both perspectives here, because he's like, well, I didn't think you wanted to hear from me, and I was just letting you be, which is like the plight of a parent, right? Which is to let your children figure out their path and their purpose on their own without interjecting and without trying to superimpose your will on top of them. And what it is to be a child, even an adult child, in a parent-child relationship and be like, I need you. Daddy, I'm so alone. And he kicks right in. He goes right into dad mode, and he's like, you used to have so much joy. And seeing you with these people, by the way, which he says earlier when he picks her up in the limo, he's like, you have that spark in your eye. Like, you have gotten something with these people that is bringing you a sense of fulfillment. He says it. He doesn't say it in that way, but he's like, your eyes are brighter, is what he says. And he says it again here, like, you used to have so much joy and kindness in you. And she looks back at him and she's like, I don't remember that feeling. And in this moment that she says this, she is throwing him a life raft to connect to her. And he's throwing a life raft right back by giving it to her, by saying, well, this is who you were. And like, before you were an assassin, like, you lit up every room. You had this joy about you. And for her to say, well, I don't remember that, is like an admission that there is something in her that has been lost, but not permanently smothered, that it can be regained, that just because she doesn't remember the feeling, this is what can fill the void. There's a void within you. Guess what? It doesn't need to be filled with emptiness and isolation and loneliness. It can be filled with joy. It can be filled with kindness. It can be filled with compassion. It can be filled with all of these things that she actually possessed in her formative years, at the core of who she was in our childhood, when we are untainted from anything, that she can fill the void with these things that she once had, and that being in the Thunderbolt asterisk is giving her some of that joy back. It's giving her some of that sense of connection back. And how brilliant that is in this conversation that they get to have on the streets of New York. And then poor New York, which just gets decimated in pretty much every Marvel movie. As a fellow New Yorker living not far from Manhattan, I would be despondent if that was happening to the city all the time. Like, New York is just constantly under demolition and then repair, according to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Anyway, we get a Shadow Daddy. We get Shadow Daddy Bob. And if you know anything about me as a fantasy and romantasy girly, we love a Shadow Daddy here, okay? I'm never going to say no to any sort of Shadow Daddy trope. Did Bob as the Sentry work for me? No. With the blonde hair? Not really. No thank you. Did Bob as the Shadow Daddy Void work for me? Yeah. Yes, he did. As people are turning into these shadow people, as they're sort of getting poofed into the void, I thought that graphic, that CGI was really cool. I really, really liked that. So we get this moment where Yelena's standing at the edge of the shadows and she makes the active choice, takes a nice deep breath, and she goes, okay, well, here's my purpose. This mental acknowledgement that she's going to go in and experience whatever this is because part of her path and purpose is to save Bob. Or at least that was my understanding of it. She makes this joke that it's an interconnected shame room. And like many healing journeys, the only way through it is through it. And we see that Yelena, when being forced to watch the scene not once, but multiple times, her instinct is to protect her inner child or that younger version of herself. And what that actually means, it's not changing anything, but that she's not alone in that moment, that there is this other version of her that's holding her, that's going to love her no matter what. And we get sort of all of these different experiences of shame that she has. You know, we've just heard her say to her dad, all I do is scroll on my phone and drink and then go to work and come home to nobody and I'm alone. And now we're seeing that embodied in this small scene where that other version of self like takes the alcohol and shoves it down her throat and she's basically like, stop, enough, this is enough now. And she goes out in pursuit of Bob and seeking Bob to be able to help him heal whatever this void is within himself, and goes on this monologue where she's like, we've got to put our phones down, we need to be together, and you know, sort of says like, show us the worst of it, like here we are, we're all with you, show us the worst of it. And they enter this very sterile room, clearly some sort of medical room. There's two other people that have been like poofed into shadow, and we see Bob, and I couldn't quite get if this was him being institutionalized to some degree, or if the worst moment, the thing that he is the most shameful of, is undergoing the sensory procedure. And you know, this inner version of himself starting to get swept away into the void, into the darkness, pushes all of the Thunderbolts against walls, sort of holds them up and away from him. So he is isolated in this moment, succumbing to the darkest thoughts and the darkest pieces of himself. And Yelena gets out and she rushes over to him. And then the other Thunderbolts get out and they rush over to him. And they're all holding him. And they're like, stop, we've got you. You're not alone. And they all find their way out of this darkness, out of this void together. And then we get this ending scene where Valentina introduces them as the new Avengers, and Yelena whispers in her ear, we own you now. Loved that moment. Loved that that was sort of how it ends with Valentina. And that's where the story ends, with them as the new Avengers. Let's crack open our burn book. Let's look at the superlatives for this episode. The Bold and Bothered Award. This was in a post-credits scene, but it's where John Walker starts saying space and Yelena just looks at him like he's discussing the physical space around them, and Yelena is talking about space as in like outer space. And she gives him this look. She just looks at him like, are you a fucking idiot? And it's just the look of a woman that is so annoyed by a man. The Shiro Award goes to Yelena taking that deep breath and then entering into the void. The Femme Fatale Award is the De Fontaine conversation that they have, where she's like, it's De Fontaine, as in, there is the Secretary of Defense. You would not say the Secretary of Fence. And it was just really funny and really snarky and really quippy. And I loved it. So that's our Femme Fatale Award. Speak Your Truth Trophy also goes to Valentina, who goes, please don't gasp at work, which I could not stop laughing. I was like chuckling, and then I kept thinking about it, and I kept chuckling when I thought about it. So I loved that moment. And then our honorary heartthrob. Listen, anything with Sebastian Stan, forever and always. He is one of the top people that I will always love and always be enamored to in the MCU. But I loved this just very slight touching of Bob and Yelena's hands. This is the type of stuff that in a romance novel or in a fantasy novel, when there is a slow burn and their hands just slightly touch, you know, it's like that Pride and Prejudice, clenching and unclenching of the hands. Because the hands touching in any sort of romantic context is always going to work for me. That is my honorary heartthrob moment. All right, thank you for listening to this episode of Femme Furious. If you like this episode, share it out with your friends and family. Put it on social media and tag me at Femme and Furious Pod. I will be back on Monday with The Last of Us Season 2, Episode 5. And then next Thursday, I will be back with a dear friend of mine, Amani, and we will be discussing fan fiction and the impact that fanfics have had on the current book talk space, that have had on our personal growth as people. So if you are into fanfics, again, you can send me all of your Yelena and Bob fanfics at femmeandfuriouspod@gmail.com. Otherwise, you can just listen to that conversation on Thursday. And until then, go and swing your tiny dicks around. Bye.